Anxious attachment in a nutshell is people often crave closeness and intimacy, but deeply fear abandonment and rejection. And as men, we're often taught that relationships in themselves are feminine. The lone wolf is this idea, and it's all about just being on your own and doing your own thing. What does anxious attachment look like in a man? It can look like overanalyzing texts, tone, and time taken to respond. An inability to wait. Anxious men struggle with the uncertainty and they want everything to be fixed and known. So why? Why might you be anxious? This can come from, so what do we do to shift this? There's a lot that you can do. Some of the work around shifting this is also around, this can be a long journey, but it's a very worthwhile journey. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and today we're going to talking about how to beat anxious attachment, how to overcome and heal your anxious attachment as a man. This is something I've worked with a lot of men on doing, right? A lot of men have come to me over the years with their anxious attachment that's affecting their dating lives and their relationships, even their friendships, right? And we've really helped them I've helped them make great strides in creating relationships, happy relationships, connected relationships, and even an inner connection with themselves, which is one of the most important things as we'll talk about. There's often this idea that all men are avoidant, right? This because, that's the kind of what I see in the dating sphere. And one of the reasons for that is, I'm going to say this really briefly, is avoidant men are the least likely to talk openly and express themselves publicly about their issues or their relationship problems. The most likely people are anxious women. There probably is armies of them on Instagram, talking and complaining about their partners and their exes. So it's very easy to make it sound like, all men are avoidant. As we're going to talk about, the societal narrative and conditioning for men as well impacts this as well. And also one of the things I think is important when it comes to dating and relationships is remembering that the people in the middle, the secure people that are just having happy relationships, or with the anxious and avoidant people just having happy relationships, they don't go around shouting about their happy relationships. They just get on with it. They're just in it, I probably don't even talk about my joyful, happy relationship very much, to be honest, right? And also we have this predisposition, could almost didn't say the word right there, predisposition for focusing on the negative, right? As human beings. So even if we're in a happy relationship, we'll complain about the things that aren't good. So anxious attachment in men, really common, really suppressed and try to be hidden, right? There's something that's really, really important, often suppressed in men because it's not the way, quote unquote, the way that men have been shown they need to be. Right? If you go into the man box, the kind of suppression of emotions, always being in control, always knowing what to do, not wanting to talk about any emotions deeply or anything deeply, being dominant and all those things. This is not necessarily how anxious men feel, right? And we're going to get into that. So I'm talk briefly, like I said, there is 4 main attachment styles. There's secure, there's avoidant, there's anxious, and there is what's known as disorganized, right? There's different names to them. Secure is always secure. Avoidant sometimes is dismissive avoidant. Anxious is sometimes known as preoccupied, and disorganized is sometimes known as fearful avoidant. It can be a bit confusing, but I generally go with avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. I think it's just really clear that way, right, for people. Yeah. So what is anxious attachment? Anxious attachment in a nutshell, in a very brief sentence, is people often crave closeness and intimacy, but deeply fear abandonment and rejection, particularly abandonment and rejection from relationships or from love. And there's a lot of stigma about this because people who are anxious are moving towards relationship and love, right? They are really wanting it, right? Because they're wanting to prove that their fear isn't true, that they won't be abandoned and so forth. And while they do that, they unconsciously create abandonment. When they haven't done the work, they unconsciously create abandonment and rejection because that's how our patterns often work out. And for men, there's a stigma around wanting relationships, right? Or being in fear of abandonment because it goes against a lot of the masculinity, the traditional masculinity or the man box or the toxic masculinity, whatever you want to call it, that we are grown up on, right? Because vulnerability and emotional need is something that as men we're told we shouldn't have. We shouldn't have emotional needs. We shouldn't express our vulnerability, right? Whereas people who are anxious often feel quite deeply, right? A desire for relationship, desire for connection. And as men, we're often taught that relationships in and themselves are feminine, you know? The lone wolf is this idea about men, you know, the Sigma man. I think it's Sigma, isn't it? Yeah. And it's all about like just being on your own and doing your own thing. And maybe a man who's anxious doesn't feel very alpha. Again, it's not a term that I use very often. And I've debunked it in some of my podcasts before about this alpha male stuff, right? So, and what does anxious attachment look like in a man? Yeah, this can be this constant fear and worry about being rejected, abandoned. And this can be inside of friendship. This can be inside of relationships as well. It can look like overanalyzing texts, tone, and time taken to respond. There's this general feeling of feeling anxious in between things, in the waiting for, right? An inability to wait, right? Or be in the unknown. Yeah, this always striving for certainty. Does this person like me? Are they going to reply to me? Have I said something wrong? Right, you know, wanting to know, no. This fear of being too much or being not enough is kind of the same fear. This hypervigilance around their partner's mood and behavior. People pleasing is a really big part of it. Nice guy syndrome fits in really well into anxious attachment. Not always. There's avoidant nice guys, but the nice guy syndrome fits into this as well. There's this very much inside of this feeling of this anxious attachment is like being overwhelmed by feelings and emotions is a common thing as well. Being really overwhelmed by feelings of emotions of anxiety and worry and concern. It's very future focused and wanting to know the future. In relationship, it can show up as clinginess or emotional reactivity, being reactive to the smallest of little things, the tone and so forth, and texts that I've described before. There's also this struggle with independence. Yeah. It can show up as just like wanting to be around people all the time and being uncomfortable with feeling lonely or not being alone, even in a home, right? Or needing distraction, right? In dating, it can be wanting to rush intimacy and not necessarily sexual intimacy, but can include sexual intimacy, but rushing the stages of dating. Like, oh, I want to get from just meeting them to knowing everything about them. Yeah. This is a feeling that anxious people often have. They want to rush through things. Yeah. Reading too much into small signs of affection and withdrawal, right? Very, very common thing. And one of the last things I say is this confusion for anxiety for chemistry. A lot of I'm just tagging this in, a lot of the content around pickup artists, PUAs, pickup artists, and even a lot of dating advice is aimed at anxious men. Yeah, is aimed at anxious men. A lot of it, predominantly, yeah, is aimed for men. Is aimed at anxious men because again, it's this idea that's kind of parried. That's not completely true. Is that if you can be more avoidant, it's usually trying to tell anxious men to be a bit more avoidant. And to some degree, that actually shifts them toward being more secure and so forth, which we'll talk about later on. But if it goes too far, it kicks them into being too avoidant, which is a lot of what the pickup artist stuff was about, was making men act that they were avoidant so they could attract anxious women and get sex with anxious women. But a lot of that traditional dating advice doesn't really work for people who are secure or wanting meaningful relationships, right? And most of the anxious people I meet, they want meaningful relationships. Sometimes they do have some fears around, they've been hurt and so forth, which we'll touch on, right? But they want meaningful relationships. They're the most likely people in the dating pool. Them and secure people. Actually, anxious people are the most likely people in the dating pool to be looking for a relationship. Secure people, I find, they might want a relationship, but they're happy also on their own. Whereas anxious men are often and women too, they want a relationship, right? Because they don't like being alone. They find being alone uncomfortable. They find being alone nerve-wracking. They have a lot of story about being alone, right? So why? Why might you be anxious, right? This can come from smothering of a parent, like someone who was like over-enmeshed, relying and maybe too much on the emotional needs from you. It can come from inconsistencies as well in childhood, right? It can be, like I said, it can be like too not overly attentive. And that might sound weird. You can't be overly attentive, but you could be, if you had a parent who was anxious towards you and your emotions. I've seen this as definitely thing. Like if you had a mother or father who was very anxious as a caregiver, this will affect you as well, affect anxious people, create anxious people. These early childhood experiences, emotional neglect as well, and abandonment can trigger it. I find also anxiety in men can be triggered from early relationships in their teen years, like a relationship where there was betrayal or it felt unpredictable and it felt destabilizing for them. Yeah. All these things, but usually it comes from early childhood. Yeah. Enmeshed mothers, controlling mothers as well. I've noticed as well, not to demonize mothers at all, but there seems to be something there. And as well, like, so I usually find with men, if their father was avoidant and that person was in their life it impacts them and they become avoidant, but not always. Like I said, there's no kind of 1-to-1 ratio here. Some of the things that also put on top of that is this kind of masculine idea. Yeah. We're conditioned to not have emotions. We're taught that weakness is reassurance is weakness and so forth. So we might try and see those things in ourselves and we might suppress them. So why is it hard for men? Because it's particularly hard for men to talk about and heal this piece, right, around anxious attachment. Because it's not seen as being masculine to want relationship, as I said. It's not seen as masculine to have all these feelings and have these worries about relationship and be worried about abandonment because, you should be fine alone, right? So there's these cultural norms around it, right? And then I'm going to add another piece in is when you hear a lot of women who have internalized, I won't call it misogyny, it's more they've internalized these ideas of how a man should be, how a real man should be. And these women are often then quite vocal online. But remember, we live in a patriarchal society. So things like the man box, which I've described of, always being in control, always dominating, never talking about anything deep, using women sexually, being good at sport and not being emotional, all the things that we're all indoctrinated into, not just men, women too. So when a man hears a woman talking about wanting a man who's strong and stoic and all these things, this impacts a man who's anxiously attached and he doesn't want to be the way he is. He wants to be some way different, right? So it discourages him from tapping into the feelings and emotions and feeling like he needs to be more avoidant, right? So all these messages we get as men, they impact how we show up. So for an anxious man, there's this constant inner conflict of like, oh, I want closeness and reassurance, but I'm feeling shamed by everybody about it because I shouldn't want that. If you're a boy and you're in your early 20s or even in your teens, there's a part of you that wants closeness, to be close to your friends maybe. You might want close friends. Our attachment shows up in our friendships a lot as well. Yeah, because they're another relationship where we get love and care. So you might be listening to this and you want close friendships, right? You want more reassurance from your friendships. You want to feel like they're, you might worry about your friends. Do they care about you? Do they like you? Do the friendship mean more to you than it does them? These are all things that might be coming up for you as you're anxious. But as men, we're taught that friendship isn't important, that we should do things alone. We're worried about homosexuality as well. It's a big part of the man box there as well. Be straight, not gay, right? So if we want too much closeness for a friend, maybe people will think we're gay. And, this tired of this kind of man box and these very traditional masculinity circles, being gay is, terrible thing to do. And I say that in jest, right? Not in seriousness. Yeah, just get that clear. So we're worried about being too emotional because, again, men shouldn't have emotions. We shouldn't express ourselves. So we kind of confuse in all that. We confuse this kind of man box traits, these really toxic traits that hurt men and hurt our mental health and all sorts. All this mental health crisis we're seeing partly can be very closely linked to, our systems of and structures of society. How society is set up, everything from the court systems to the work, the way that we siphon off men from their families and make them work hard and be in soulless organizations and so forth, as well as how we prize how men should be. Avoidant tendencies seen as strength, for example, a lack of emotion. I won't even call it stoic because I see stoic as a philosophy, not as this kind of modern bastardized way of being. But because of all this, we kind of look at this anxious attachment in some way as being quote unquote a little bit feminine. Yeah. A little bit needy, and as men, we're taught we shouldn't have needs. Yeah. We shouldn't be lonely, right? We shouldn't need relationships, and it's all rubbish, right? Because they're all things that we need and want. Yeah, I speak to so many men who want relationships, right? But they don't feel they could admit it. speak to loads of men who want closeness and they want friendship, but they don't feel they could admit it, right? Because this societal narrative and indoctrination runs so deep. It runs far deeper than our conscious mind. You know, if you're sitting here going, oh, I don't believe all that stuff, you need to look at what you do. Look at how you've shaped your life, you know? I think a really good example is seeing men's responses to like having their nails painted, for instance. There's a lot of men who are like, oh, you know, societal masculine norms don't mean anything to me. And you say, why don't you paint your nails? Nah, dude, no. and they because that's how deep rooted it is. We don't consciously, we think with this like woke, not even woke because that word's been again bastardized and co-opted, but like we're an awakened, integrated man. But like, you know, we would get a pedicure, we get our nails done, we won't pamper ourselves, right? Because of this societal narrative that we've been given about what it means to be a man. So for anxious men, there's often this fear, as I've talked about, of feeling shameful for their internal world they're feeling, wanting a relationship, feeling all these emotions, you know, having sense of longing and desire for friendship and relationship, having feelings of unsureness about themselves and fears of abandonment, right? And feeling weak and being too emotional, plus they get the societal message that keeps coming about what it means to be a real man. And then mixed in that is stories of women who are like telling, you know, saying that men should be strong and they should be unflappable and they shouldn't feel anything and they shouldn't express anything, right? And that can be really confusing for a man, right? Really confusing for an anxious man. So there's a lot there, right? The masculinity, the anxiousness, it's all there. And this is the thing I find that shifting anxious attachment is something that's very, very doable. I've done with multiple men, right? I think they're the most likely to come forward and do the work. They're probably the most likely to go into therapy, right? They're also probably the most likely to be, to feel quite nervous about doing those things, but they will do it because the drive in them, the desire for closeness and connection is very powerful, right? Really, really important. So what do we do to shift it? What do we do to shift this anxious attachment? There's a lot that you can do, right? And I'm going to just try and encapsulate that in here in some of the work that I have done with people. The first stage is always awareness. Is getting aware of your patterns and habits. Like, how do I chase connection, for example? What are the triggers that make me feel anxious? What are the triggers that a partner does or in dating that I start to worry about abandonment, or I start spiraling to thoughts that I'm going to be alone forever? You know, it might be dating apps, right? You go into dating apps and you start sending messages and you find, oh, no one's replying to me, and you start spiraling into these thoughts of I'm going to be alone forever. Like, is something wrong with me as a man? You end up in tears and crying and sadness like every time you go near dating apps, for instance. That's one of the patterns. Yeah. It's to start to look at what the pattern is. What is it? Right. So you can spot it when it happens and you can start to catch it and be like, oh, wait a minute. It's not the truth. Yeah. The thoughts I'm having about this is not necessarily the truth. This is the thoughts I'm having about this. Yeah. To notice that, there's a set of thoughts I'm having. It's not the truth. And understand the fear that's beneath it as well, right? The illogical fear that's there. And the story. Yeah. What's the story as well? Just getting an understanding of the landscape. Like, oh, I get anxious when my partner doesn't respond. The fear is that they're going to leave me. They're going to abandon me. Abandonment fear. The story is that, they don't like me anymore. They don't value me anymore. They're going to leave. Where does this come from? Yeah. Was it that your father used to go away for long periods of time and didn't tell you, or you had a partner, a girlfriend when you were at school and the same thing happened, right? It's to see where you're taking the past and you're bringing it into the future with all the feelings and emotions. So this is a really important aspect. Another aspect I see is as this emotional regulation, self-soothing, being able to be with the discomfort. Because what happens with anxious people a lot is that they start to feel a buildup of anxiety and feeling, right? You know, they're dating somebody and the person hasn't replied for a few hours. So they start racking their brains for what happened. They start reading the messages again and just get spiraling more and more anxiety and worry, anxiety. And then they convince themselves that they need to take some action. They need to send another message. They need to apologize for something. They need to explain something. Yeah. They need to do an outward message to dissipate this feeling of anxiety. Yeah. And this can be as extreme as, and I've read some things where I heard of a woman who the guy she was dating cancelled the date, and then she drove past his house, right, to see if he was actually there. Right. Now that technically is stalking. Yeah. But she, in her thought processes, was like, I want to catch him. I want to get some certainty about what's happening. She was in uncertainty, even though he told her she was 6. She didn't believe it. So she was seeking certainty. It's a really important part of anxious attachment is this seeking of certainty, even if it's negative certainty, right? And that can be done through story creation, right? In the mind, wanting a story. So this is where self-soothing practices come in, right? This can be things like breath work. This can be things like journaling, right? This is coming back to self. Instead of reaching the energy out, oh, I'm hooked into what my partner's doing or the person I'm dating or why this person hasn't replied to me on a dating app. Bringing that energy back to yourself and going, I'm okay. Am I as I am? This situation doesn't, dictate my life. Yeah, I can give myself enough love. I don't need to keep reaching outside of me. This is a really important aspect of it when I work with men, is teaching them practices to stop being like octopuses. He's a phrase of someone inside a program I'm in currently. I'm trying to flail around to get energy. It's actually to bring those arms back in and wrap them around yourself. Really important part. Shifting this inner dialogue that you're having about yourself, and there's something wrong with you and you've done something wrong and all these things, this spiraling of thoughts, and coming back to grounded presence. And this is kind of connected to the next piece, which is self-esteem work. Some really important self-esteem work has to happen with anxious people because they're seeking their validation externally. They're waiting for everybody around them, not everybody, but a lot of people around them, the people they love, the people they are wanting to get attention from, to validate who they are, right? So the self-esteem work here is self-validation, creating the capacity to trust yourself and your decisions, not second guess the choices you're making all the time, or to be trying to work out how you can configure yourself to be acceptable to other people, right? It's self-esteem work. It's self-leadership work as well. Yeah. It's learning to lead your own life and understand what it is that you want, the values that you hold. Yeah. And sticking to those, even when the people you meet that you care about or you fancy or whatever aren't that way inclined. And the self-esteem work is really important because if as an anxious person, you don't take care of your self-esteem, you're outsourcing your self-esteem to other people. You're outsourcing your self-esteem to the women that you meet. And you're always polling. If you're a tech person, you understand this is like a constant checking to be like, am I worthy? Am I worthy? Am I worthy? Am I lovable? Am I lovable? Am I lovable? And each time you're asking that question internally, checking, you've forgotten about all the previous answers. Even if it's been a yes 100 times, when there's a no, so they don't reply to you fast enough, right? Or they cancel a date, that no spins you into the feeling of into abandonment. So you have to bring all this energy back that you're putting out to get validation and so forth, and bring it back to yourself, right? And give it to yourself. So the self-esteem work's really important. Leading life, getting grounded in who you are more and more and more. And this is a practice, right? It doesn't happen overnight, right? And a really important part is building up this nervous system capacity for discomfort, emotional discomfort, even physical discomfort. Yeah. Because when our nervous system is not good with discomfort and pain, right, uncomfortable emotions, you're going to do the thing I described before, is you're going to always look to dissipate it with some action. Yeah. You're going to dissipate I feel uncomfortable because I don't have anybody who loves me right now, or I don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend. So I'm going to go on a date with somebody just so I can feel some validation. Oh, I went on this date. Oh, it was nice to have the validation. Oh, they said they don't want anything serious. But actually, maybe if I just love them, I'm there, they'll change their minds, right? The lack of self-worth here of someone telling you what they want and you not listening to it, lack of self-worth, People with self-worth will just go, oh, well, I'm worthy of the thing I want. Okay, cool. Well, I bid you farewell. Had a great day, but it's clear that you don't want what I want. No problem. That's okay. Like, bye. The person without self-worth will be like, oh, let me try and massage who I am. I don't think I really deserve the thing I want. So maybe I'll just take these crumbs of what someone's offering me. Yeah. And this is where we get into situations as anxious people, where you're in dating and relationship situations where they're not really what you want, but they're just so you have somebody. Self-esteem work. Yeah. Coming back to self. Right. And this is where having, like I said, I've worked with a lot of men around this. Having a coach or a therapist can be really useful, particularly a coach. Like therapists, depending on the type of therapy. Talk therapy can sometimes just be talking and you don't lead to any actions or changing in choices and decisions. You're just cycling around in like, oh, my anxious attachment with coaching. And the coaches I know and I am, it's like we're really looking at you making different decisions and choices. So self-esteem is so important for anxious people. Cultivating powerful communication as well. Communicating your needs, your wants, your boundaries, your desires. Because when we're not self-confident, when we're not got self-esteem, we just hide all those things in the hope that we'll just be given them, right? Or we think it's too much. And obviously there's a balance to not just meet someone and go, these are all my relationship needs, these are all my needs right now, 2 minutes after dating them. But if you've been with a partner, for instance, and this is a really standard one I've seen with people, they're with a partner, you're with a woman, and you want kids, but you don't bring up the topic because you're so scared of them not agreeing with you. So you're in a relationship for a year, 2 years, and then you have a conversation, you realize they don't want to have kids, but you do. But you stay in the relationship because you hope they'll change their mind. Yeah? Because you don't believe that you can really go out and get what you want outside this relationship. Because there's a fear of being alone. There's fear of not having somebody, right? So it's this powerful communication of expressing yourself. And some of this is like real grounding work, of being able to be grounded in the things you want, being able to hear the discomfort, the action you don't want, or the response you don't want from someone like, oh no, I don't want anything serious, and be able to stay grounded in the moment, not spiral into your thoughts and emotions of abandonment and so forth. And this comes from self-awareness work, this comes from embodiment work and so forth, to be able to have that groundedness. Like, look, this thing isn't going the way I want, but it's okay because I'm not going to collapse into catastrophizing everything in this moment. And then some of the work around shifting this is also around boundaries. Sorry, I was going to say non-romantic relationships, but I'm going to talk about boundaries first. Communication and boundaries go together quite closely, but it's like cultivating and holding your own boundaries, yourself first. Yeah, learning that. Like, okay, I'm not going to go and drink tonight. Cool, I don't drink. Right? Something like that. Or, certain boundaries inside of dating, for instance. It might be not sleeping with somebody until, you've had a certain number of dates. If you're a woman listening to this, you might be like, oh, that doesn't happen to guys. It does. Some guys feel exactly the same way. They go on a few dates with a woman, they have sex, and then the woman doesn't want to see them again. Yeah? So it's like having that boundary, or, the boundary around, okay, they haven't replied to me, but my boundaries, I'm not just going to sit here catastrophizing about why they haven't replied. I'm going to take some time and I'm going to go away and I'm going to do something for me. Yeah? The boundary with self, really important. And then there's the boundaries of others. Holding your boundaries, expressing them, but also holding them as well. This is a really, really important thing for anxious people, is they don't hold their boundaries. Yeah, they don't hold their boundaries. And I think another piece around for healing anxious attachment is also around emotional containment. Because anxious people often learn to spewing emotions constantly out to other people, particularly in relationship and in dating and so forth. And it's learning to, like, again, it's like hold containment of just like, oh, I can be with my emotions. I don't always need to find somebody to tell everything that I'm feeling or tell everything that's going on for me so that I can work everything out, or to validate my story, or tell, like tell me that I'm okay, I can do that for myself. I can do my emotional processing with myself. This doesn't mean that you don't talk to anybody about how you feel and blah, blah, blah. But it's like if 90% of the time you're always going out to other people and being like, oh my God, this thing happened to me. What do you think? What do you think I should do? What do you think I should say? And da, 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 and all that. It's like bringing that down to say 20% and seeing how that feels. Because it's also how you build self-trust. You start processing your own emotions. You start making your own decisions from what you want. And then your decisions get better when you trust yourself. They might not immediately, because you start to build up this like information of an information bank of experience of me making choices and them going well or badly. And you start to decide on what needs to be done next based on the experiences you've had. Yeah. Really important, making those choices and decisions yourself, and sort of outsourcing all these choices and decisions, particularly going to friends. I'm really anti going to your friends for dating and relationship advice all the time, right? For people in general, because most people's friends, if you're single, often most of your friends are single. Yeah. And this is the key, is like, if you've got people around you who are like, don't like women, they're angry at women, or are, want to say shit at dating, shit at relationships, bad communication, untrustworthy, whatever it is, taking dating advice from them can be an absolute minefield. So just being mindful of that. If you've got people in your life who are in really healthy relationships, yeah, who are date from a really healthy place, are obviously quite secure, like taking some relationship advice from them, okay. But like if they have the same car crash relationships and anxious relationship or seriously avoidant relationship is opposite of you, right? Be really mindful. I think sometimes for anxious people, it can be really good to have an avoidant friend to ask things to understand there's like a middle ground between the two of them. I think it can be really good to and in the same way for avoidant people to have an anxious friend to help them move to get perspective on some of their behavior. I think it can be really useful. And I've seen it in my own friendships as well. Right. But it's like, be really mindful who you're seeking advice from when it comes to friendships and relationships. Have that be a boundary. Maybe you don't always talk to these people about your relationship constantly. Another piece is to start to create safe relationships, like in your friendships. Yeah. Safe relationship in your friendships, not just romantic partners, not always looking for romantic partners to give you that. So it's like learning to communicate clearly, learning to put boundaries in place, learning to say no, to say yes when you want to stop your people pleasing, all these things. Because there's times where inside relationships, particularly people pleasing, where there's this feeling of guilt, like, oh, if I don't say yes to them, I'm a bad person, or what are they going to think of me, where we're projecting. Yeah. It's seeing where we're doing this projecting inside of relationships, romantic relationships, but also inside of friendships. You can say yes to you. You don't have to please everybody. It doesn't work. Yeah. This is one of the kind of hallmarks of anxious attachment, this feeling that I have to please everybody, this kind of nice guy syndrome, per se. But it's like you can say yes to you and you do the things that you want to do. So what else do I decide? So I've talked about the leadership, self-leadership, but also there's this cultivating external leadership. Something I see with anxious men is they're often scared to lead in their friendships and lead in their lives and lead in their relationship to him, because there's so much second guessing. So there's so much like, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing and I don't want to upset anybody. They don't lead their friendships either, their lives. So it's like, start shifting yourself so you start to take up more leadership in your life, going after the things you want. Yeah. Doing the things you want alone. Yeah. Creating more independence, like holidays alone, weekends away alone, going to certain events alone, because this is independence, right? That security of being, I'm okay alone. I'm okay to do things alone. It doesn't mean anything about me. It doesn't think I'm a loner or whatever. Joining communities. I'm so hot on people joining communities at the moment. Like obviously I've run a small community myself, but I also have been in and done talks in communities. Some of you might have come from, I did a talk at a company called Social Wellness Club, but there's communities that are bringing people together, and it's a really great way to create friendships and also create relationships as well, romantic relationships, right? And heal some of this anxiousness that you may have around friendships and around like being close to people or being abandoned and left. Yeah. Finding healthy relationships and healthy spaces. Like I think community is really the future. But back to leadership, it's like leading yourself like taking leadership up in your life instead of waiting and being passive for other people. I find that anxious men can be quite passive, waiting for other people to do things, to invite them to things, to ask them to do things, to ask them to join groups. So it's like, it's flipping that and being a leader, right? And part of leadership is facing the potential of rejection, facing the potential of not being liked. So it's like a practice in meeting some of these parts of yourself, right, that feel uncomfortable. Like, oh, they don't want to come out of me. What do I make that mean? Where does that come from? What's the underlying fear? What do I know to be true? You know, I have a belief shifting practice I do with people, right? And it's amazing when they go through this practice, they see the belief, they see all the different components of it, all the different layers of it. And then we shift it into something else. And it just really, they realize like, oh man, I've been doing this in my life, this belief about myself being not good enough, or being abandoned, or people not wanting to be around me, or me being too much. And it's impacted every area of their life, from their relationships, to their businesses, to their friendships, right? So these things are about practicing in being the way you want to be and how you want to show up. But you have to start being aware of the old stories and like leading yourself into something different, creating that self-regulation, that self-soothing, so that in the times where the old stories come in and the old emotions come in, you can be with them, you can face them, and you can start to choose to do something different. So another thing I think is really important for men in particular, when we're looking to shift this anxious attachment, is redefining masculinity for ourselves as well, right? If you're listening to this podcast, you probably listen to other episodes, and you can see that shifting our view of masculinity is really important. Yeah. Shifting the idea about strength. I spoke to a guy called Mark Walsh a little while ago, and we talked about strength and like how we can redefine strength, not just as physical strength, which is often there, or emotional strength of men being suppression, but seeing emotional strength as being able to hold the emotions and be with them, you know, and seeing leadership, like vulnerability is a form of leadership. Yeah. And connection as a form of strength as well, to start to see that as a different way of masculinity, right? And being in spaces where that sort of masculinity is practiced openly or talked about openly amongst men is really important. Because the weight of an anxious man is also feeling the weight of this kind of traditional masculinity. There's also kind of holding him back. There's telling him that he's not good enough, that there's, you know, that he's somehow like a feminine or defective man. Yeah. I say them in air quotes for those of you listening, because that's not how I see it. But like, you need to reimagine, redefine masculinity, because the weight of that is also impacting the anxious attachment as well. So again, something else that comes up as well is shifting is like practicing self-love, self-acceptance, really important, gratitude, and also taming this comparison. You know, again, it's part of this kind of octopus arms that are flinging out and waving around the place, seeking for validation. Is this comparison is something I see a lot in anxious people, is starting to shift this comparison piece, right, towards self, like gratitude, instead of comparing yourself as lesser than other people. You know, I see anxious men often get really future focused and projecting into the future, protecting negativity and trying to work out all the eventualities before they've happened. You know, that's why like I said, the pickup artists were so successful in capturing anxious men, is because they gave you strategies for the future. Because anxious people, anxious men struggle with the uncertainty, and they want everything to be fixed and known. Because if things are known, then they don't need to worry. They don't need to feel anxious. It's when there's an unknown in the space, an unknown in the future, I don't know what's happening, that space gets filled with the anxiety, the fear, the insecurity, the worry. And the work is to start to allow that space just to be there. Oh, I don't know. That's okay. I don't know. I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to work out. Yeah. Because I care about myself and I love myself and I'm whole as I am. I don't need this woman to validate who I am and show me that I'm loved. Right. And this can be a long journey, but it's a very worthwhile journey. Like I said, I've got multiple clients who are now in relationships off the back of some of the work that we've done around this, you know, feeling super happy in those and so forth. And I know I'm often known for working with avoidant men, but it's not the sole people I work with. But there's this like leadership, self-confidence, it's like an inner knowing that must be cultivated, an inner trust in self, and not less of a trust in others, but instead of looking for others to validate and direct. I think I'll stop there. like I said, I think there's a lot of hope with anxious people. Like, you know, one of the things you also have to do is stop blaming your exes and your avoidant partners as well. That doesn't help you. It just keeps you stuck in the energy of pain, as if holding on to the pain is like some sort of comfort blanket. It's not. It's actually like a prickly, spiky blanket that continues to stick you, and it doesn't allow you to move on. It doesn't allow you to heal from those things. So like letting go and forgiving and moving forward, and just not being bitter and so forth, really goes a long way to help the future healing. Is something, again, I've seen. Like, compassion for self, compassion for others goes a really, really long way in this sort of work around anxious attachment. So I'm going to wrap up there. And just say, you know, if you know someone this is useful for, send this out to them. If so otherwise I want to say, if this is you and you're looking for some support, just drop me a message. I've got a spot or two free for my one-to-one coaching. And like I said, my community as well is going to open up again in the next month or so. So if you're interested in joining a community of men that are doing the work, that we go through practices together, all the stuff we talked about around self-soothing and grounding and self-awareness and reflection and activities we do together, and just like this community of men who are doing the work and supporting each other and there for each other. If that's interesting to you, then let me know. Just drop me a message and I can tell you a bit more about the community. So there's a few ways to work with me in that case. All the links are going to be down below in the show notes. But until then, I say ciao, ciao.